Happy holidays! Welcome back to my channel, Comic Book Noise, where we talk about my comic book company, Digital Noise, where we talk about the characters and the storylines of the Digital Noise universe. Today I want to talk about something that's been brewing within the industry, and that's diversity in comics. So, what the subject matter is I want to talk about is diversity pandering in comic books today. So, this is something that's been going on for quite a while about the controversies of forcefully putting diversity within the major comic book company characters, which is DC and Marvel, which they put in inclusion of different types of minority representation within the comic book industry. Like, say, for instance, they change a historically white character. Take, for example, the Green Lantern and change him into a black character. Or Captain Marvel was once a man and was once a black African American woman, and now it's a white, superpowered superheroine, one of the most powerful superheroes within the Marvel MCU universe. So that has been a lot of controversy there. But I wanted to talk about, is it pandering or not within the comic book industry to include diversity? So I think, from my opinion of what I've seen, it had some effect on comic books in general and the readership of it. But I don't know whether that's from including diversity, or is it just the nature of the comic book genre itself, as far as declining from the month to month comic book format. So I know Marvel and DC, each issue comes out every month of a title of a comic book that they distributed. And it's a lot of money now. Like, a book can cost up to $5. When I was growing up, it was like 50 cents to $1, in my teens and stuff like that. And you would get great stories, and but now you get less and you pay more. So it's just very interesting how times have changed because of that. So if you see me look down for a minute, that's my pet Rocky is like making noise. So I'm just making sure he's okay. But anyway, the idea of having diversity, I think, is good. I think it's a good thing. I think it might be kind of chaotic the way they're doing it, because in a lot of cases, because some of the storylines lack credibility or great imagination or just basically good storytelling. And so I don't know. Yes, it's good to have politics within comic books and a certain message within comic books. But the art of writing a story and telling a good story is still relevant to make a comic book successful or a comic book character successful. During my time, I've worked for Marvel, and I worked for Marvel at a time where diversity was lacking in my eyes within the industry, between Marvel and also DC. During that time, you had like the Black Panther and Luke Cage, and other characters that are of African American descent, like that. You had Storm, which is a strong representation during that time, but it was still didn't represent the real world of representation of African American people. And also, the African American characters or the black characters within Marvel or DC did not rival their peers or weren't as powerful as their peers or wasn't represented as intelligent or strong or just an overall strong character within the comic book industry, within Marvel or DC. So that representation lacked for me. I think Storm was a great representation of showing the African American representation, but she was only one person and she was female. Black Panther is a good representation, but he was basically from Africa. But you had like the Falcon, you had other characters. There were other powerful, like Moses Magnus was very powerful, but he was on as a villain, represented as a villain. And just a few other characters during the 90s that were kind of represented as the powerful black character in Marvel or DC. It didn't even come close to characters like Thor or Phoenix or any other of those major, powerful, level 10 characters that we all knew and loved in the 90s. But now that I'm seeing now the representation of black characters are coming in abundance. But from what I'm seeing and what I've studied, mostly all of the black characters that were created for Marvel or DC were mostly made by and created by non black people. And so that takes concern for me because how can you understand a character where it's coming from if it's written by someone outside of that demographic? It will be that person's vision of that demographic. And not to say that no one can do it, but it's mostly almost 99% of the time, if you look back in the history of each black character within Marvel or DC, it was created by someone who was non black. And so to me, that shows there needs to be more diversity behind the scenes as well as within the comic book industry. So I found that very important. Even though we're making strides, there's Ironheart. They're really developing Monica Rambeau within the MCU universe. From what I'm understanding, the Black Panther was a major success and is a major success that they're building up within the Marvel and within the Marvel franchise. As far as DC's is concerned, the Snyder Universe, but as far as comic book sales was going, it were going in a downward spiral. But what's going up is in the comic book industry is the graphic novel. And because right now, as it stands, the comic book industry as a whole grossed, I think in 2020, I think over $1 billion last year. So comic books still have a strong hold and strong interest with consumers. But I think the format of the monthly to monthly comic book issues are dying down. So, as far as digital is concerned and as far as graphic novels are concerned, that's going up. So, I think that diversity is very great. I think when it falls up into pandering is when you read a story and it looks forced or it's not a good story of a character and it's a lack of explanation, like say for the LGBTQ community, as far as when North Star was the first openly gay character that came out in the comic book industry, and that was in the '90s when I was working with Marvel, and John Byrne created the character in the '80s, I think, or the late '70s when they fought the X-Men. And John Byrne intent for the North Star character was to be the first gay openly character in Marvel, but it was never revealed that he was gay. It was insinuations of that, but it was never really brought out. But not until the '90s when Marvel had Scott Lobdell to write, I think it was Alpha Flight or the X Men during that time, where North Star just admitted he was gay. And so that was a natural course of things. And I think that was a real cool storyline and a real cool character that naturally came out as gay or LGBTQ. And but there was a problem after that. It didn't. After that, you didn't see him on romantic dates. You didn't see him, for a while, be openly expressed in comic books about his sexuality until I think the late '90s and the beginning of the 2000s, the new millennium. So there was still lack of representation just by representation of living a lifestyle of a LGBTQ character. So, but I still think that it was good that it came out naturally. I think, but now where it's going into pandering, I think it's when there are characters that have been historically, I guess, known to be heterosexual, are now coming out as gay because this it's the times now, and that characters, I guess, very well known, so they want to just hit to the characters now to be set that trend and be hip and trendy and stuff like that. And instead of telling a good story, is for political issues more than telling a good story. I think that's where a lot of people had complaints about it. But yeah, there are homophobic and racist people out there. So no matter when and how you tell a story, it's going to bother them. But I think some of the stories, let's take for instance the New Warriors. When he revamped the New Warriors, there was a character called Snowflake, and I forget the other character's name. And there was a big problem with that, But you can look those characters up and find out why people had a problem with those. And it was basically it looked very forced to look like telling something trendy. There were new characters, but it was very almost stereotypical and almost like a scapegoat of just saying let's do a LGBT character, LGBTQ character, and we can knock that out as a quota instead of really investing in those characters and really creating cool characters that just happen to be gay. Again, I go back to also with female representation. Free, I'm all for women's rights and women female representation. I created a book myself, which was the kind of first of its kind, like in 2006, called Delete, and she was like basically the only African American woman that had her own regular series, and she was like leading her own. She was like the first African American woman that was visibly African American that starred in her own comic book title. But but as far as females are concerned, there are a lot of gripes of female representation being overly represented in comic books right now. And that's like Captain Marvel was one of them, and they just revamp her, give her superpowers like over in abundance. The more they create her, the more they give her powers. So she, They want to tout her as the most powerful superheroine or a super being in the universe. And so there's a lot of backlash with that, a lot of backlash of how they draw her and illustrate her as almost as like a man or very masculine, and just making the men look feeble within the comic book industry, not with as within Marvel, as the Marvel characters, and it was just, I think a lot of people, with men and women, a lot of men and women are turned off by that character, which I have no problem with a female character being a superpowered being or being the most superpowered being, and I don't mind Captain Marvel myself, but I'm just talking about the gripes that a lot of people had with the character. And now with the MCU showing representation, like if you look at this year, and it's factual. I mean, look at the Black Widow with the Taskmaster, was usually known as being a male in the comic book industry. In the MCU, now she's represented as a female. And then you have the Scarlet Witch. When they did Scarlet Witch in the Vision, she's like ultra power. She can warp reality in any way that she likes. And now you look at Hawkeye, and the miniseries Hawkeye on the Disney Channel, Disney Plus channel, in the MCU of the series, they have a female Hawkeye. They tell the story's more leaning towards her instead of the original Hawkeye himself. So I think, and it's more to come from what I understand, but I think a lot of people are now seeing that a once comic book genre that attracted boys mainly, are now they're trying to switch that over for girls to enjoy and girls to see representation in themselves and kind of make the men second fiddle within the comic book industry. And I think that's how a lot of people see it. And so I think the agenda here is diversity is a great thing in comic books. I have no problem with it. The only thing I would ask of every issue or every title of those initiatives is to tell a great story first, and the representation will shine through anyway. That's how I write my books. I guess if you create new characters and do the stories right, like if you look at my comic book titles like Delete, The Positive Omen, my Coming Up, The Sound System, and my other coming up comic book called Red Alert, you'll understand how I write my books and how you'll see my characters from the get go. They all have diversity from the beginning, because I think Marvel and DC's problem is when they were established comics, it was mostly the white male that was the head honcho of the comic book genre as superheroes. So, but now I think with the times that are changing, they're trying to basically force a lot of those characters into diversity, which could be looked at as pandering at the moment. Because if you really believed in those issues, it would have started out from the originality of it. And I think Marvel was a good way of starting with it with the X-Men, and that was a good segue. And with Black Panther, when Jack Kirby and Stan Lee created Black Panther, I think that was a good way. But I think now with a lot of the established characters that were once white cisgendered men are now representing diversity, and it seems forced to a lot of people. But I think it's good in the long run because once you kind of establish the characters, you can get writers to tell a good story. But that's another video to talk about with nepotism and all that stuff in comic books, instead of just finding right people to do a good story and a good book. But I think diversity is working in the comic book industry, and I'm glad to see it because that's what I was striving for in the 90s. And now I created my own comic book company, and I see other comic book companies followed that suit. I think it's a great thing that people now do see diversity, but what I'm asking now for those same companies is to have representation of diversity behind the scenes, as well as just driving with for characters within the comic book industry. Now I see that's the next level that I see that's needed, because let's have some black people create a black character. Let's have some people of representation create those characters, because again, mostly all the minority characters that are created within the two majors of Marvel and DC are basically non-black, or basically white or Caucasian, as what however is the proper way to address the demographic. But anyway, that's all I have right now. I think it's a good thing, again, that diversity is being more included in the comic book industry and more representation, and that it continues to do that, but also tell great storytelling and do good stories and really care about the characters that they're creating. All right, but I just want to leave you now, and I want to give you a send off from my comic book company called Digital Noise, and wish you happy holidays. Take care and be safe out there.